Alrighty, welcome back to Shut Up and Ball NFL edition here on this last day, almost second to last day of March. As per usual, though, I am Aaron and I am joined by Mr. John Harris in his AP jersey. How are you doing this fine Tuesday, Mr. John?
I'm doing good. For anyone wondering, I'm not a Vikings fan. I just love Adrian Peterson, so I have his jersey. Uh, that's the whole explanation. Otherwise, doing good.
Good to hear. So a few things happen in the NFL. Probably sooner than some expected, and we're just gonna dive right into it. So in case you didn't hear, not just one, but a couple of draft trades happened. I believe in the same day. Probably was almost soon within like an hour. I feel like it was very very close. It's kind of like a domino effect. So basically, in case you don't know, Miami Dolphins previously had the third pick. They traded to the San Francisco 49ers for their number 12 overall pick. I believe the third round pick they got for Robert Saleh getting hired, which is, I believe, for next year. And then also next year's first, and then the following year's first. So basically the first round picks for the next 3 years, including this year, and the third round pick for next year. And then obviously they move up to 3, but then that's not all. The Dolphins from there move back into the top 10 trade. I always forget the details, but basically they gave up the 12th pick, and I forgot what else, to the Eagles, who were at 6. Eagles gave, I should have pulled that up. But regardless, the bigger, more immediate fact is now the 49ers move from 12 to 3, Dolphins move back from 36, and Eagles move from 6 to 12, and I think they get a few assets. First thoughts, John, on when this trade occurred, and then just any other points.
Well, first off, I want to start with anyone who thinks that the Niners might have overpaid. I haven't seen a ton of it, but I have seen some question marks of like why they traded up. We'll get a little more into that whole conversation later in the pod, but this is the price. Like, this is what you pay to go up and move up to one of those top 3, top 4, 5 picks, especially when you want to get your quarterback. Like, this is what you have to do. It instantly makes me think of the other really good young offensive genius who went to a Super Bowl and lost, Sean McVay. He did the same thing, but he did it for Matthew Stafford. Here we go with Kyle Shanahan doing the same thing, but in the draft. Also, I think maybe this move has some fallout from the Deshaun Watson situation. Obviously, no team is really engaging anything trade-wise with the Texans right now because of that. So I think this has probably almost risen the draft stock of some of these QBs. This has risen the value of some of those high picks because the big trade target in the league is off the board. So it's all these young guys. But I applaud, first off, the Dolphins for what they did. I mean, we have Chris Greer, their GM, in the overlay here, and that's because what the man has done, turning Laramie Tunsil into I think 4 first-round picks. I can't remember how many seconds and thirds, but shout out to him because he's just worked wonders there in Miami. I know that a hot topic in the NFL has been the hiring of minority GMs, minority coaches, all that stuff. Well, in Miami, they got Brian Flores, minority coach, Chris Greer, minority GM, and they're working wonders over there. I honestly, with the amount of draft capital Miami has, they could be a very scary team for a long time because we saw how solid they were this year, and everyone felt like they were ahead of schedule. And you add even more draft capital to that. The Dolphins are set up to be a very deadly team moving forward. Especially considering that then they did that trade with the Eagles where they got right back to the top 6. They got the 6th overall pick. I don't know who you think they're going to get. To me, it feels like the 2 obvious options are Jamar Chase just a receiver in general, and then Kyle Pitts. Obviously, a lot of people are sort of skeptical on the tight end because they have Gesicki and he's really solid, and I agree. But the way that some people feel about Kyle Pitts is that he could be a Hall of Famer. So who knows? Maybe, Brian Flores, he's a Patriots guy. Maybe he wants to do this sort of 2 tight end set like the Patriots used to. I don't know. I personally think that it's going to go receiver just because it fits along with their timeline more. Once, Devontae Parker, Will Fuller, those kind of guys, contracts are running out. That's when your rookie receivers deal would be, coming up for a contract extension. So it just works really well if they were able to get a receiver. And Jamar Chase, Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle, whoever they take, they're getting a special guy to make that offense even more deadly and get to another weapon.
Yes, so I would agree in regards to. I think it would probably be wide receiver more likely than tight end, just because I just feel like, especially just the league in general, it's hard to pick a tight end in the top 10, especially in that in those early picks. I don't know the history. I just feel like especially now that we're seeing tight ends go later. I mean, Kittle was, and I'm not saying every late tight end, but I feel like most teams can find value later in the draft in tight ends. But yeah, I do agree. Wide receiver, I feel like is kind of the most obvious one. Maybe offensive lineman. But I'm trying to think, and that's really about it. Unless they do something drastic, but they don't really need corner. They drafted a first round corner last year. We know they have your boy Xavier and Byron Jones. They're set there. And the linebackers, you mentioned it's Brian Flores, New England. We know that they probably wouldn't spend a first round pick on a linebacker because they love having 4 or 5 linebackers. They'd rather have a deep linebacker core than just one guy because it is a physically demanding position. So yeah, those are the only 2 real spots I could see. Maybe build more around Tua, give him another year, and see what you got. And as you mentioned, they have more first round picks. So hey, you build around Tua. Things don't work if you don't feel confident this year or another year from then. You have the ammo if you're still a middle team or even if you're still like in the middle of the pack team to move up, kind of like how we just mentioned the 49ers did. Maybe a few drafts from now, you can move up, get your guy. Yeah, so like you mentioned, really like what the Dolphins did, and they didn't really need to move back, get more assets, but they did. And then, so yeah, and I think once again, like you mentioned, moving back to 6 means, I'm pretty sure they have an idea of a wide receiver they want, and because I imagine they have like maybe 1 or 2 just in case one of them gets taken before 6. So okay, number 1, let's say it's Jamar Chase on their board, he got taken at 4 or 5. Okay, then let's get 6. We'll get our number 2 receiver, for example, Devonta Smith if they feel that way. So, yeah, great move for the Dolphins. Eagles, I like the move too. I think we mentioned before, Eagles are a team, a lot of doing rebuilding. They needed to get more assets. They've gone ahead and done that. If they're still looking at wide receiver, they can probably still get a good one. Probably won't be, Jamar or Devonta. But hey, maybe if one will fall to him. I mean, last year it wasn't until Ruggs was the first receiver taken, and it wasn't until 13. So maybe they got a feel that the receivers will be, some of these guys will fall. So we'll have to see what the Eagles do. Regardless, they have a lot of needs, so they may just be at that point say we're just going to sit at 12, take best available. Unless it's a tackle or even then or a quarterback, but otherwise take best available from there. And then obviously, like we mentioned, we'll talk more about the Niners, but I think, like you mentioned, I just think it's a good move. And then I'm not sure we should talk about this later, but it's a good move for the Niners to move up, make sure you get your guy. And we'll mention that for the 3rd overall pick. But I really don't have like a loser in this of the 3. I feel like it's just a good move for all teams. Was there anything else you wanted to mention?
I would just say that I have seen, as a Cowboys fan, I see a lot of NFC East stuff. Some Eagles fans are not excited about this move because they're bringing up, well, you could have had Justin Jefferson. You could have had DK Metcalf. You passed on those guys. Now you're doing it again. But this time you're not allowing yourself to get one of those players. To anyone who thinks that, I mean, if you just look at like the Eagles draft capital over the next few years, this was a great move for them. Right. First off, they have 11 picks this year, and they only moved back a few spots. Okay. I mean, I don't know who they're targeting, who's at the top of the draft board, but if it is a receiver, you can still get one of those top 3 guys at that spot, I believe, because just based on the teams that are still there, I even think there's potentially another team that's going to trade up for a quarterback. I think that you can still get one of those guys. Also, now if you include the Carson Wentz trade, they have 3 first-round picks next year. So if Jalen Hurts doesn't work out, they have the draft capital to go and pull off a trade to get, in the top of that draft. If, he does work out, well, boom, you have 3 first-round picks to just build around him and get a lot of key pieces and replace some of these veterans who are going to be, moving on, eventually retiring, all that kind of stuff. So, I think it was a good move for all 3 sides. I think it also does probably stop a little bit of the temptation because I know that the Eagles owner has asked that they build around Jalen Hurts as opposed to replace him. There has been some reports that their GM, Howie Roseman, is not super confident in him. I think that this trade, ultimately, I think it helps stop some of the temptation if, say, like a Justin Fields or somebody's there at 6, that they don't go for that and, once again, build around Jalen Hurts as opposed to replace him.
Yeah, and then to add on to that, it prevents, if they were to draft a quarterback, prevents more awkwardness, because they just had kind of split locker room with Wentz and Hurts, and then all of a sudden, so it's preventing them from that situation, like you mentioned, and once again, like you mentioned too, just piggyback again, aging roster. I mean, Fletcher Cox, he's the only solid D lineman. I mean, they still have Brandon Graham, but he's getting up there in age. Fletcher Cox is also getting up there in age. They really don't have any linebackers I can note of. We know they traded for Darius Slay, but Darius Slay's getting up there in age. And then, like we mentioned before, some of these linemen, they still have Kelsey, but Kelsey's in his early 30s for the center. At some point, he might call it. Same thing with, Lane Johnson's been dealing with a lot of injuries recently. So maybe next year, after evaluation, if they do stick with Hurts, or even if they don't, they might still have that extra first to grab a tackle or something of the sort. So, yeah, Eagles are a team to watch. We'll mention it a few months from now, but as of right now, definitely one of my candidates for possible worst team in the league, like we did before, just because they're just in flux. A lot of roster turnover, and